It's a punchy little reading, and it comes right in the middle of Mark's Gospel. You might say at a real crux point in Mark's Gospel. Up until that point, the narrative has been begging the question, who is this bloke? That's the Australian version. Who is this man? This man Jesus, as he moves around the countryside, preaching and doing stuff. Who is he? And then we get the answer, you are the Messiah. You are the Son of God. And the second half of Mark's Gospel is all about what that really means. And right at the heart of that kind of crossover of narrative, we get this little interaction. It's probably the most fiery and intense engagement we see with Jesus and one of his disciples, Peter. And the rebuke is really strong. But you see, the thing is, Jesus said and did so many things that are outside normal, that are beyond normal, that if we don't find ourselves balking at them, we're probably not understanding them. Jesus was never constrained by the established understandings or patterns. He knew what they were, he just wasn't held back by them. He focused on what liberated the oppressed, what gave sight to those who could not see, what brought life to those who had no life. And all of this is well beyond normal. Jesus was beyond all existing expectations of what a Messiah would be, which isn't surprising in a way. Expectations build on past experience, and that's the way we train people. You know, we do something with them and they learn, and then they expect something. And my daughter, Pay, who you just saw run out the back, she was most anxious for me to tell you that she got bitten by a dog on the cheek, and I think you should make a fuss of her when she comes out afterwards. At first it was very traumatic, and then she was like, oh, I got bitten by a dog. Anyway, when Pay comes out of our house onto the village green, all the local dogs follow her. Now, she will tell you that this is because she is a dog whisperer, and that might be true, but probably just as likely is the fact that she frequently has dog treats on her person. And the dogs know this, because dogs are not stupid, and once you've been there with a treat once or twice, the dogs know. Their expectation is built on past experience. I know what's going on here, I know that person, and away they go. Previous experience shapes what we expect going forward. And so, there's somebody expecting something. Peter could be forgiven for his expectation of Jesus not quite fitting the picture that Jesus was painting. Based on history and experience, Peter's hope was for a mighty conqueror, a victorious general kind of Messiah, a figure of triumphant power. In many people's minds, this is the very meaning of victory, to defeat one's enemies by any means possible. Instead, Jesus is painting a very different picture, and is it really fair for Peter to be able to pick that up? It's so far from past experience and the expectations that would have given rise from those past experiences. It seems almost a tad harsh by Jesus, this strong rebuke, "Get behind me, Satan." Imagine having Jesus say that to you. It'd be a bit unnerving, I imagine. But there were overlooked hints in the scriptures. Things that Jesus was saying were not outside the experience of Israel. They're actually right in the heart of Israel's history and sacred texts and so forth. They were made explicit by the laws and even further developed by the prophets. Things like the servant songs in Isaiah painted this picture. Can you see the person there? Once you see her, she's easy to see, but also very easy to overlook if you don't know she's there. She's made of stone apparently, but hiding there. So in the story of Israel and in the sacred texts of the Hebrew Testaments, there is this theme, it's there, and once you see it, it's everywhere. But until you see it, you don't see it. Isaiah puts it like this: "He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening for our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed." It's all through the history of Israel. But the people, particularly the leaders and the teachers, were not very keen to see it. And so they reinterpreted such passages in a way that made them more obscure rather than shedding light. So we can have a bit of grace with Peter, I reckon. But Jesus goes on to say some more disturbing things. Basically, he's suggesting that there's something beyond doing life just in a way that protects ourselves and looks after ourselves that is very, very important here. Now, we all know what it means to be safe, don't we? We kind of come out of that evolutionary process where it's survival of the fittest and you've got to run faster than the person who's chasing you and all that kind of stuff. And it's those species that adjust most to the change and the situation that's going on that do well and they survive. And in a way, I think that's given us a preference for self-protection. Maybe you're not somebody who's got a preference for self-protection, but I think most people do. And safety is important if you want to survive, right? But safety has limits. Safety seems to be good for protecting and preserving life, but self-protection keeps threats away from us. And in a funny kind of way, lots of life has inherent threats in it. You know, things like relationships, or changing your job or career, or borrowing money, or giving birth to a child. All these things are threatening in certain ways. And if you want to avoid any kind of threat, well, that creates a bit of a tension within us. You kind of have to avoid parts of life, withdraw from parts of life in a way. If you want to be absolutely safe, you've got to just keep a whole range of things out of your life. But some of the best things in life are not very safe. I think things like love, those sorts of things. When Jesus says, anyone who seeks to save his own life will lose it, he's speaking a truism in a sense. It's a fractal of reality that can be seen in so many places. Whether it's when you get a new job or when you're courting a new partner, anything like that. There's so much we don't know. There's so much inherent risk in that process. We cannot know what we're getting ourselves into. We might have a few job interviews or a few dates or whatever the situation is, and we pick up just the minutest amount of information upon which we build an understanding and hope for the best. But if you want to avoid risk, you'd never do it. I mean, who'd change jobs? Who'd go in a relationship with anybody? It's just too dangerous. When we first start out and make those sorts of commitments, we know such a small fraction of information compared to what we'll know in a week's time or a year's time or 5 or 10 or 20 years' time. There's so much inherent risk in the unknown. But whoever wishes to save their own life will lose it. They'll shut down and keep things away, and life will get smaller. And whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's sake will find it or save it. And I think Jesus is there beckoning us to go forward in self-giving love, in service in each situation we find ourselves in, and then we will not miss out on the best things going forward. And finally, Jesus turns to talk about our deepest values. And values are funny, you know, because often they have a timeline or a time frame that makes them valuable. Like investment advisors, I do a bit of kind of babysitting with my mum. That doesn't really make sense. Parent sitting. Anyway, whenever she sees her financial advisor, I go along with her, and she has to fill out these great big forms about how risk averse she is and what her timeline of investment might be and all this sort of stuff, because there's different investment classes, and if you want your investment to return maximum return in the short term, there's certain things you invest in, and if you're younger and your investment horizon line is longer, there's other things that you'll invest in because they're safer, but over the longer period they'll yield good returns. Apparently I really don't understand any of what I just said, but that's what they say. So investments or value have time frames around them. So something is valuable in a short term, but it may not be valuable over the long term, and something that's valuable over the long term may not be so valuable in the short term. You know, most of the really, really big companies that exist today, the first period of their time, and even some of them that are big today still, they don't make much money. It's a really long game that's being played here. All those, Google and Amazon and mobs like that, they've borrowed so much money, but they've cornered the market, and the people who are investing in those companies kind of think things are going to come good. They might not have yet, but we believe in what's being done, and eventually it's going to come good. It's a really long game. How far out can you take your value timeline? 10 years? That's quite a long time, isn't it? If you're engaging in a mortgage situation, it's probably more like 25 to 35 years these days. That's your kind of value timeline. I wonder what it would look like to have a lifetime investment time frame. What would that look like? Maybe we start to shift in thinking about what's important or valuable when we think about a lifetime. We might start to think about things like education choices and career choices rather than smaller investments. We might, as parents, start thinking about how we raise our children, nutrition issues and educating them and those sorts of things. They become lifetime, time frame investment kind of things. How are we going to spend ourselves? How are we going to expend our energy and our creativity and our resources? The relationships we're going to enter into, those sorts of questions. I wonder what an eternal time frame might look like. Jesus asks the question, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul? These are serious eternal time frame investment considerations. When you consider a frame that is bigger than simply the 70 to 100 years, if you're lucky, that we might spend wandering the earth, what are the considerations you focus on then? What are the things that bear the weight of time and stay good and worthwhile investing in? Can you think of anything? What's more valuable than anything else? What has more value than even potentially your own life? What is it that we gain the most from in life, and might say gain the most life from? What is it that makes life most worth living? What is it that offers a sense of meaning and connection in an otherwise potentially meaningless passing of time? I want to suggest it's love, and that God is love. Not the self-indulgent kind of sense of pleasure that we sometimes use the word love for, like I love chocolate, which I do, but that's not the love I'm talking about. Love that is truly other person centered. Love that gives of oneself. Love that brings life to another person. Love that looks a lot like God at work in the world. When Jesus comes on the scene in first century Palestine, He comes as a Messiah who is so far beyond the established expectations of what a Messiah will look like. So far beyond that his closest disciple doesn't recognise it and tries to rebuke him. Jesus beckons people beyond their instinct for self-preservation, and he says, if you're going to follow me, take up your cross and follow me. Those who seek to save their own lives will lose them. It's so far beyond our survival instinct, our self-preservation instinct. And Jesus invites us to value that which is beyond the value of anything else, to value love, the very kind of stuff of life, more than anything else. Jesus calls us to follow him. He shows us how to do it and calls us to follow, to go where he goes and to go in the same manner as he goes. Jesus calls us to not be normal, but to go beyond normal. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, many of us spend a lot of time and energy seeking just to get to the place where we feel normal. And then you come and call us beyond there. Help us to hear what your Spirit is saying, that we might be wise and generous, we might be open and thoughtful, that we might be responsive to your call and responsive to the people that are around us, and so live in response to your love and enter fully into the life you've created and called us into. In your precious name, amen.